Hi there, Quilt Studio. We are going to share our first quilt adventures, knowing that as this September back to school month has arrived, we are working and thinking about how can we best help beginning quilters.
Absolutely.
And part of being an empathetic teacher is walking the walk.
Oh my, and first quilts.
First quilts. So, Marilyn, what do you remember about your first quilt?
Oh my gosh. Well, I made my first quilt in 1981, so that was about 1,000,000 years ago. And that was back, took a class, and Barbara Thompson was the teacher. We had paper templates, draw around the template with a pencil, use a ruler to add the 1/4 inch, cut it out with scissors, and then we hand pieced. So the whole quilt was hand pieced and hand quilted because that was the only thing that I knew how to do at that point in time.
So what kind of colors are we talking about?
Oh my gosh, 1981, keep that in mind. I remember my mother-in-law saying to me at one point that brown was a great neutral because brown you could put brown and pink, brown and blue, brown and orange, whatever. Brown goes with everything. And I was making this for my daughter who was about 8 at the time. I'm not telling you how old she is now. So the quilt was brown, pink, and forest green. It was a sampler because we learned lots of different blocks. Some were applique.
Right.
I remember she was really into horses at the time, so it has a double horseshoe, applique double horseshoe on one of the blocks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. But you remember it fondly, and she still treasures it, yes?
I think she still has it. I'm not sure how treasured it is.
You know what? I would be willing to bet that our children have more than the average number of quilts.
Oh, probably so.
That's probably true.
Yes.
So, what lessons stood out from that for you? So if you were going to glean the most important things you learned from your beginning quilting experience that might be passed on to today, what would you pass on?
Well, the first lesson was there's a reason that they invented sewing machines. Also, that quilting can be portable. Because with the hand piecing, we could take it or applique or whatever, it could go with you wherever you were. Also, rotary cutters were probably the most important because drawing the line in order to cut it out with scissors was so time consuming, and you were tripling the work,
right? Because
you're tracing around it, adding the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then cutting it out with scissors. Where now you take your ruler and go whoop, 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 and you're done.
That's right. But you know what? Sometimes what's old is new because there's this whole movement of slow stitching. I don't know if you've seen or read anything about it. So in English, paper piecing is back in vogue, and it's not quite the same thing, but similar.
Well,
similar.
I don't think hand applique, whether it's with wool and embroidery stitches or traditional hand applique, I don't think it's really gone anywhere.
Right. And you still enjoy hand stitching.
I do.
But you've turned it more towards the wool work kinds of things rather
the hand stitching is meant to be shown, where if you're hand piecing or traditional hand applique, you're hiding all of those stitches.
Right.
And mine show regardless, so I might just as well do it on purpose. Use those pretty threads.
Hey, that's all right. Yeah, if one thing, that's a great lesson too. You don't have to be perfect in order to have a beautiful quilt that you feel good about.
Absolutely.
That's a great
lesson. And people need to remember the 10-foot rule.
Yes, and explain the 10-foot rule and the galloping horse rule.
The galloping horse and the 10-foot rule is pretty much the same thing. The galloping horse is that if there's something that you feel might be a little bit better, but you can't see it from the back of a galloping horse, and whether that means the quilt's on the horse and you're watching, or you're on the horse and somebody's holding the quilt, that's the galloping horse. But basically, when we're working on something, we're working on them so close up. Our face is a foot away or less sometimes, and we see every single tiny thing. If you'll take that quilt, back up a little bit, give yourself 5 feet, 10 feet away, a little bit of distance, you see the whole thing instead of just seeing that one minute little thing. If it still bothers you, fix it. By all means. I've learned in teaching all the beginner classes, I can't tell them, it's fine, you don't need to fix it, because if it bothers them, it will always bother them. And 5 years from now, they'll say, well, yes, this is a beautiful quilt, but look right there, because
right, exactly.
That's where their eye will go every time. So if it bothers you, fix it. But try the 10-foot quilt first.
I love those. Those are great tips for a beginning quilter. Those are great quick tips. Well, you're looking at my first quilt, and I began quilting about 27 years ago. Can you believe it was that long ago?
Oh, that's amazing.
So Marilyn and I have a mutual friend who kind of got me into the world of quilting, and very soon after that, Marilyn and I started quilting together. But this quilt right here is the result of that. And this is a good example of, if you're going to make mistakes, make them all in one quilt. But you know what? I still love this quilt. It still goes on my husband and I's bed the weekend after Thanksgiving. It's a Christmas quilt, of course, and I truly enjoy it. Now, that being said, I do see lots of mistakes in it, and it reminds me of how much I've grown as a quilter. This quilt, in the frenzy of learning how to quilt, I did know some sewing techniques. Didn't know anything about quilting, but I pieced this quilt, which is quite simple. It has large pieces and, you know, basically alternating blocks.
Your square in a square block is a little bit complicated.
Yeah, well, in any event,
for a brand new
for a brand new quilter, maybe. But I pieced it in about 2 weeks. And that's, you know, it's a queen size quilt. So I pieced it really fast, and I was like, yes, I'm done.
Yay!
and then
now what?
Was the hurdle. The hurdle was, how do I quilt this thing? So I said, well, I kind of want, you know, I want that fancy stuff. I want feathers. I want this. I want that. I wanted to do it all. And it's got metallic fabrics in it, very poor quality fabrics in it. Again, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? We all learn.
We all started, yep.
So
start somewhere.
I wanted metallic thread. So again, is it a great idea as a beginning quilter to start with metallic thread?
Not usually recommended.
No. Is it a great idea to begin machine quilting with metallic thread? Definitely not. But you don't know what you don't know. So
ultimately it worked.
I started quilting this quilt, and it was recommended that I start with a walking foot to stabilize it. But in order to do that, I stretched it out. I got out my safety pins, because that was the thing you did.
Right.
And I think, you know, 300 pins for a quilt this size.
Every 6 inches.
Okay, every 6 inches. Again, we forget those things that we have left behind. And I used a walking foot, and I quilted down the rows. And I go, wow, it's kind of hard to move this around. Wow, this is challenging, even just doing the straight lines.
Right.
And then I sat and looked at it and go, well, if I'm going to do feathers in this, I guess I'll have to learn free motion quilting. And at that time, there weren't a lot of resources, definitely not the internet, with all of the resources we have now for helping us learn how to machine quilt. And so I started with little tiny samples, and I read a book, and I did a little sample, and I did another book, and I read it, and I did some more little samples. Little samples just started piling up in my quilting room. And then before you know it, it's time to just like, okay, I couldn't get any better.
At some point you just have to jump in and do it.
I was struggling though. I was just really, really struggling, and I took it to someone to machine quilt it, and that there were very few and far between.
Oh yeah, back then.
And they saw the work that I had done with the machine quilting, and they saw the quality of fabric that I used, and their literal words to me were, "You don't want to machine quilt that." And then
wow.
then
Ouch.
I was incensed. I was going to learn how to machine quilt. So
Wow.
yeah, so that's really where my adventure began. It became out of a little bit of,
was accepted.
the challenge was accepted, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to quilt this thing." And you know what? I think really that's where my love of machine quilting was born. It's like, you're going to tell me I can't machine quilt this quilt. It's going to go on my bed.
Right.
So
and this was all done on your domestic
yes,
machine,
this was
right?
all done on
This
a
was
9-inch Bernina machine. The same machine.
long
actually,
before long arms, handy quilters,
That's
Big
right.
Blue, any of that.
Right. So in any event, I started learning some skills, and I started and struggled with the machine quilting, but I did it. All right, I'm going to try this design, and I knew it would be easier out here on the side, so I started out here and I did some machine quilting of some holly over here in the borders, and I figured out an easy path that I could do some machine quilting on the edges, and I go, wow, it's hard to move this. Wow, it's really challenging. Maybe I should try hand quilting. So what do? I pull out some metallic thread. Again, you don't know what you don't know. And I hand quilted these hearts.
Well, I was going to comment on that because most people feel like once you start with one type of quilting that you're stuck, and or
I was stuck.
well, that kind of stuck too. But people don't necessarily think about being
Changing
able to use more than one technique. But you've hand quilted the little hearts and machine quilted the little
right,
feathery motifs here.
right,
And it works, and it looks great. And it's one of the things that I noticed about just, touching this quilt is it's very soft.
It's been washed like half dozen times.
But it's also minimally quilted,
right,
which holds it together through washing,
right,
but it still allows it to be soft and drapey.
Yep.
A lot of times people get so involved in the quilting that it's stiff,
right,
because it's so quilted,
right.
which that's good too. It's just two different kinds of techniques. But this is very soft, cozy, feels very loved.
Well, it is well loved, and maybe it's part of the struggle that I love, because it was a huge learning process, and I did use different techniques. I used different marking techniques. I used different tools, and your skills continue to grow as soon as you start quilting a quilt.
Right.
I really think it's the quilting the quilt that's the important part. And I still love stitching on my domestic machine. Now we have these beautiful handy quilter machines. And is it easier on a long arm? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's easier.
Even the stationary
and
ones.
faster.
Right.
And faster. However, I guess my number one thing is, don't let your tops stay unquilted.
Right.
Whether you need to take them to someone. We do machine quilting for other people. We'll quilt your quilts for you, but don't let them stay unquilted, because those are the things that end up in a garage sale someday. So, and
even after all these years, I'm always amazed at the difference between a top and a quilt, because you piece the top, or you see the top somebody
right.
else did, you love it, it's gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. it gets quilted and it just takes it to another level.
Right.
And the quilting gives it such texture and dimension and depth and just really enhances all of the things that were quilted.
And I think a mindset that's also helpful with all of this, a mindset, is when you finish the top, I think that it's not a bad idea to think of the quilt as half done.
Right.
I think it's half done because between the quilting and the binding, you've got multiple hours that you have yet to walk.
Right.
And for heaven's sakes, find an enjoyable way to do that for yourself. So, whether that's hand quilting, whether that's, using your walking foot, whether that's free motion stitching on your domestic machine or, on a long arm, find an enjoyable path forward.
When I was first learning, of course, the teacher taught us hand quilting. My husband's grandmother was a hand quilter. She did beautiful work, but always hand quilted. So it always felt to me like machine quilting was cheating.
Oh, but was when you first started machine piecing, was that considered cheating?
Oh no, that was such a relief.
No, but did other people see it as...
I don't know. Nobody said that to me, and I certainly didn't.
But yeah, I remember that vibe. It's like, oh, that's machine quilted. I remember hearing that a lot, actually.
What I found was I was not making quilts I wanted to make because they weren't going to be worth the time that it took to hand quilt them. So I felt like I gave myself permission to learn how to machine quilt because that was faster, and then I was willing to make other things because I knew I could get them quilted in less than a year.
Giving yourself permission to not be perfect is huge.
Absolutely.
As a quilter.
Absolutely.
Because we can all I could find a zillion mistakes in every quilt that I make. But guess what? I've decided that I'm giving myself permission to be happy as I'm quilting because I still quilt for fun even though I own a quilt shop.
Right.
I still quilt for fun. And it relaxes me. It's therapy for me, and I truly enjoy the process.
Right.
It's artistic. It's creative.
We used to say it was cheaper than therapy, but I'm not sure that's true anymore.
I'm not sure either.
My husband likes to tell people that quilting keeps me out of the bars.
Well, I don't know.
There are projects that require wine, so I'm not sure that's 100% true.
Well, anyway, but first quilts are a thing to be treasured and enjoyed. So if it takes you 2 years to quilt a quilt, I'm cheering you on and I get you. However, don't stay there forever. We look forward to helping you at Bluebird Quilt Studio, whether you would like us to quilt your quilt for you, or if we can help you learn how to machine quilt or be a better piecer of quilts. We're happy to help you at any point along your journey. We have walked the walk, and apparently we've talked the talk today. But anyway, we thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you have enjoyed this little walk down memory lane. It's been a while, Marilyn.
It has. It has, yes.
But we look forward to visiting with you in person here at Bluebird Quilt Studio. We have an amazing show pricing that's being offered on our handy quilter machines through the month of September. We will be at the Boise Basin show sharing those machines with the community, and also sharing some beautiful custom-made Bluebird batik, and look forward to sharing some new quilts that we've quilted.
Yes.
So
they have improved.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.